Okay, boomer friend, welcome. Let's talk about curmudgeons. Not a word you hear very often nowadays, and if you're younger, you may not even know what the word means, but it has often meant an old person who's irritable, stubborn, bad-tempered, disagreeable, cantankerous, and crotchety. In the old days, it applied mainly just to men, but I think in the 21st century, it's fairly gender neutral. If you're rooted in strong dogmatism and believe that only your views are correct, you might be a curmudgeon. If you feel and act like you've got all the answers, you might be a curmudgeon. If you're not able to relate to people without the power and authority you once had in your life when you were younger, you might be a curmudgeon. If you're still highly concerned about impressing or influencing other people, you might be a curmudgeon. If you are critical, you might be a curmudgeon. If you're not able to maintain self-respect while letting go of self-importance, you might be a curmudgeon. They say aging is a second childhood, but if you're living your life more like your second adolescence, you might be a curmudgeon. If you're unable to contemplate more than one solution to a problem and never consider contradictory solutions, you might be a curmudgeon. If you're not able to relate to people without the power and influence you had when you're younger, you might be a curmudgeon. If you're still concerned about influencing and impressing people, you might be a curmudgeon. If you're expecting unearned respect just because you're old, you might be a curmudgeon. In fact, if you're expecting unearned respect, you might want to consider going back to living in the 1950s or maybe China. I hear they're very receptive to older people in China. Boomers expecting the millennials and younger people to give them respect merely because they're old. It's not part of the cultural landscape in many parts of our country. If you often find yourself in situations with people younger than yourself who maybe tilt their head, roll their eyes, and say to you, "Okay, boomer," you might be a curmudgeon. If you avoid the challenges and tasks inherent in aging, you might be a curmudgeon. If your friends are calling you Mr. Scrooge and they're hoping for 3 ghosts, you might be a curmudgeon. If you're somebody looking back in your life with a great deal of anger and despair at perceived failures, maybe your failures, but maybe other people's failures, you might be a curmudgeon. If you've decided to pretty much dig in and refuse to evolve and change with older adulthood, you might be a curmudgeon. And lastly, if you're living in a senior residential community and you feel a need to bring a gun to the monthly residents meeting, ask yourself, could you be a curmudgeon? For those of you listening in blue states, that probably sounds outrageous, but this is Missouri, and within 40 miles of where I'm at right now, the sheriff has to attend the monthly meeting of one of the residential communities because of the number of men in their 70s and 80s who feel like they need to bring a gun to the residents' monthly meeting here. Not everyone who calls themselves a curmudgeon actually is. Oftentimes, particularly old men, like to laugh and say, "Yeah, I'm just an old curmudgeon," but they're actually not a curmudgeon. It's sort of like they're a sheep in wolf's clothing, because in actuality, you would need to look at somebody's actions and inside their heart to decide if they actually qualify to be a curmudgeon. So you might wonder, what gives me the authority to talk about curmudgeons? Well, I did start working in a nursing home as an aide back in 1971 and spent some time during my professional life as a nursing home consultant. I also was a therapist for older adults for a period of time, but I don't think it was any of that. But back in my 60s, which seems like quite a while back nowadays, I did quite a bit of online dating. And I really noticed a very big difference between some older adults who maintained a flexibility and a positive attitude and seemed like they had made the transition successfully to becoming an older adult, as opposed to those who maintained a really strong dogmatism, anger, rigidity, and resentfulness. Thank you for watching, and check out my other OK Boomer Friend videos for information and insights to assist you with aging and retirement.